And I'm guessing that we're live, Marcus. Is that correct?
Yes.
We are live. All right. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody to the Black Powder Podcast, proudly hosted on the Firearms Radio Network. My name is Michael White, a.k.a. MW for Liberty, joined this evening by Marcus Matthews, the only real Libertarian, apparently, my melanated brother in arms, and Eric Parker, Bold Liberty, down from Jacksonville, Florida, joining us again. I guess, Eric, we liked you, so I think you're going to be just a perennial thing here on this show. So we've roped you in to the Black Powder Podcast. You know, see, Marcus, what I did is I tried to make sure that like there was strength in numbers here. I was like, I got to get more Caucasians on the podcast. You're going to have to go grab a black dude. We're going to have to just keep doing this, like this war of attrition here.
That's what you think this is. Yeah. But this is actually my affirmative action program where I'm giving you guys the opportunity for success in life.
There you go.
From a black perspective.
From black, I got you. Okay, so there you heard it here first, folks. This is affirmative action in the works via Marcus Matthews. You are a benevolent ruler, Marcus.
We believe in the civil rights.
That's right. Thank you so much, Marcus. So
welcome.
Before we get going, we got to pay some bills here. For the folks at home, if you're listening live or if you're listening on the recording, let me ask you a question. If you're sitting on your couch right now, you're sitting at your computer, you got your phone open, whatever it is. If somebody kicked in your door right now, this second, and was armed, what would you do? Most people would say, well, I would run and get my gun, or I would go here, or I'd do this. You know, when seconds count, right? So you need to be armed. Visit our sponsor, Common Arms Trade Company. That's commonarmstradecompany.com. I'm a big proponent of everyone owning something subcompact, something that they can keep handy with them all the time. It's just, I would love to be able to carry around a long gun all the time, but I'm not 6'10" like Marcus is. All right. So Marcus, how tall are you exactly? Aren't you like 6'10"? 6'5". That's still enough, man. So Marcus can walk around with a long gun all the time. You know, for us that are more vertically challenged, you know, this is what's handy for me. So visit commonarmstradecompany.com. It sounds like it's spelled like it sounds, and use promo code Black Powder for 10% off any order over $100. They got all kind of cool stuff, man. They got like, I noticed today, man, on his site, he's got potassium iodine pills for like, for like nuclear fallout. And I was like, I might need to get some of those. You know, need to get some of those. I think I might need to. So anyway, that's paying our bills. Again, everybody, welcome to the Black Powder Podcast. And
I just want to one thing real quick.
Sure.
I was born with a long gun.
You kind of broke up there a little bit, but I think I know what you said.
I said I was born with a long gun.
I think I know what you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got it with a long pause.
Like, okay. All right. So Marcus, you're usually typically like the DJ of topics, I feel like, on this show. We got a lot to cover, obviously. Today is October the 11th, 2023. I mean, there, like Eric said pre-broadcast, we kind of got an elephant in the room here. Yes. What you want to talk about, Marcus? What you want to talk about, Eric?
First off, I want to thank both of you for joining in today. You guys are awesome. You inspire me. You are the wind beneath my wings.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And I think the elephant in the room is Israel and what's going on in the Gaza Strip and how Americans have gone to their political corners again and missed the middle part of the nuance of this situation and the 75 plus years that it's been festering.
Or 2,000 years.
Well, you could go to that part. Yeah.
I think you could go like way back, I guess, if you wanted to. But yeah, I mean,
go way back.
That really is it, right? Is that, something happens and people start picking sides. I mean,
well, I think this particular issue is within that 75 to 100 year period. And that's what's more relevant right now. You could talk about the cultural stuff from a few thousand years back, but it's that recent political crap that's led us to this point. Eric, you were saying something?
I was just gonna say, what's the old saying? You know, never let a good crisis go to waste.
They're
And
certainly
that's my
doing that.
issue with like both sides of and we say sides, you know, us
Right.
and libertarians, we turn the political spectrum on its axis and we look at authority, liberty. Some people could be a little more left economically or a little more right. So whenever we say left, right, that doesn't really, I guess, have that big of an influence on the way we look at things. We usually look at it authority or liberty.
That's right.
And the left and the right are both, in most of them, in the authoritarian spectrum,
Right.
and they're going to use this to their advantage, and they're already doing it. And you could see it everywhere, and that's the infuriating part with me. I saw two guys that I respect a lot, Austin Peterson and Spike Cohen, going back and forth about it, and it was a good exchange. And then I went back and listened to Spike on his show, and I thought Spike did a better job defending his points of view. And because I said that to Austin Peterson, he didn't block me, but he quit following me on Twitter. So I'm a little bitter about that. But anyways.
I lost some followers, man, too. I reposted a Dave Smith tweet regarding this, and I literally said at the top, "What are your thoughts on this?" And I had a longtime follower who like followed me like early on in my campaign from like 2022. And he commented and said, "You've crossed the line. I'm done with you." And it was literally, it was the tweet where he says, "Hey, look, this was stupid and horrible, and it's going to make life really hell for these people. And then also, this is going to be more horrible by what happens. And all we're going to have is we're going to have bloodshed answered with bloodshed. And surely we can all find a way to find peace eventually." That was basically what he said. And apparently that crosses a line that I don't want any more people to die.
Well, you know, let me stop you both right now real quick, because I want to get an answer from both of you on this so we can have some context to the conversation that we're having forward. What is liberty to you two, to Michael and Eric? What is liberty to you?
Michael, go ahead.
Man, liberty to me is the ability for a man or a woman or any adult to choose their own path in life so much as the resources they can gather and do so. The idea that they're in control of their mind, their body, their labor, the fruits of it, and what would become their private property. That's what liberty is. That's what it is to me, is the ability for you to have a self-directed life, so much so to the level that you don't influence or affect anybody else's ability to have a self-directed life or harm somebody. That's liberty.
All right, Eric?
Yeah, to me, economic freedom, individual liberty, prosperity for those that are willing to go seek it. And sorry, my dogs are.
That's all right. I mean, we're a dog-friendly show.
This is a
dog. But I'm gonna have to go close the door. But just like people not infringing on other people as long as they're living a peaceful life. You know what I mean? Live and let live. Leave people alone. At the same time, you have the right to raise your family and try to influence your community around you as much as possible.
Right.
I'm going to mute and shut them up.
All right.
And for me, I believe liberty is absolute. There is no substitution for it. It cannot be parsed out in pieces like you have the right to this, you have the right to this. Liberty is absolute. And you have the absolute right to defend yourself because the only entity that exists that will take away your God-given rights. And when I say God-given, I've always said this from your very first heartbeat, your God-given rights to your humanity and everything associated with that. There's only been one entity in the recorded history of mankind, and that has always been government.
Always has been government. And you know, we've talked about this before, but liberty is a very new concept in the world as far as being embraced by governments, because up until roughly, I mean, you kind of had sprinkles of it occurring in the French Revolution, but up until really the American Revolution and the founding of this republic, every other government was essentially founded on the idea of monarchy supremacy, that there was some individual who was above everyone else, who made all the rules, and you had to follow it. And so, you know, we turned that concept on its head. And it's no secret that in, 250 years, because we had that as a founding principle, even though it wasn't perfect, Marcus, obviously, it wasn't perfect, right? I mean, your ancestors didn't exactly embrace or get to embrace all men created equal, did they, when we first got here?
It's been a long time.
been a long time, but we became a more perfect union, right? We constantly worked on ourselves, and it's no secret that like in 250 years we came to possess, half of the world's good things. Because it works. Liberty does work. I don't like to talk about liberty in a collective context, but the truth is that liberty is really good for society. You have the most effective, most financially prosperous, you have the best outcomes when you just take Eric's principle of live and let live, so long as you don't stop somebody else from living. I mean, you just do better.
With that being said, and I want to preface this whole conversation that we're about to have with the fact that you just heard how we believe liberty is. When the United States was formed, we had acts like the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party.
Yep.
When King George was putting troops into people's homes, King George was not allowing freedom of assembly and trying to collect weapons and things of that nature. How did the Americans respond to those acts of tyranny? Everybody saw this, right?
I think it started with it originally started with civil disobedience at first.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then whenever the crown and the layman term redcoats, they started infringing on their liberties and their rights, and then they started pushing back. And then, like they said, the Boston Massacre, I think to this day it's still debated and who fired the first shot. But
right.
It always eventually comes down. It always eventually comes down to that, right? I mean, push comes to shove, authoritarianism meets liberty. Eventually, if those two things continue to push against each other, it comes down to bloodshed. It always has. Right. And that's unfortunate that it does, but it always does.
Right.
Because like you said, you have a right to defend yourself. You have a right to defend your liberty. And people were just tired of the shit, man. They got tired of the shit.
Yeah. So in the Boston Massacre, the colonials were throwing oyster shells at the British troops that were surrounding them and whatnot. So you have oyster shell could fuck you up. Let's not even bullshit.
Oh yeah, bro. I can skip one of them like 30 times across the water, dude. You throw it just right, man.
Well,
for sure.
You throw it at somebody's face, you could easily cut.
Eric, you know what I'm talking about from down in Florida. You take that thing concrete down, and you can sling that son of a bitch. Yeah, exactly.
And they're sharp.
They are sharp, dude. And jagged. Yeah.
You can fuck somebody up with an oyster shell. So
yeah.
That's what the colonials were throwing. In Palestine and Israel, over the last couple months, over 200 Palestinians have been killed in clashes with Israeli forces, and the vast majority of them were throwing rocks at the IDF and whatnot, and the border police. And rocks are dangerous. Rocks will kill you. I don't think an oyster shell will kill you. It will slice the shit out of you.
Yeah, dude, if you were throwing a rock at me, like if you started picking up like big rocks and throwing them at me, I'd probably shoot you. Because you would kill me.
Yeah,
I mean, I probably would.
The projectile just has a few fewer feet per second. If I could spit that out, then 545 that's coming out of the.
Well, David killed Goliath with a rock. I mean, so
Yeah, he did have a slingshot though.
Yeah, he did. He did. Whatever it was called.
Yeah, but
he was concealed carrying that thing.
Yeah, man.
That thing on.
So don't Mia Khalifas when we talk about what we're going to talk about. This is some bullshit. Before we get started, I want to bring up Mia Khalifa.
I don't know who that is, Marcus. I have no idea who this person is.
He is responsible for more knuckle babies in America than I don't know. Probably Pamela Anderson. Somebody. These are my choices in women. I'm trying to.
She gets canceled. Is that basically what happens here? Like, because I really did not know this had occurred. I mean, so I guess this was like 20 things down on the news feed.
Yeah.
So what did she say exactly, and what got her canceled, so to speak?
It should have been number one on the news feed. That's number one. Number one on the news feed. She just expressed support
because she is Muslim or her
She's
family
Palestinian, right?
Yeah, I mean, so
but there's a lot of Palestinians in Lebanon.
Okay,
But he
so
expressed support for the Palestinian people, and there's
okay.
a lot of people out there who says, "Hey, we need to look at their issues as well that are getting canceled right now because everybody is just like in their trenches, you know, ready to
I
lob."
mean, look, I
Yeah,
mean, dude, the fact is, like, I mean, I do have to kind of, I get it. Like, you know, you had like a massacre occur,
right,
and like people are going to have a hard time going, well, let's talk about their problems too. You know, I'm
right,
like, I
yeah.
don't, I mean, I'm kind of with that idea. I'm like, you know, like fuck Hamas. Like, I mean, like, and I kind of hope that
I
like
think
Israel
everybody
wipes
can
them off the
agree on
earth.
that.
Like,
Yeah.
honestly, you know.
But how do you get rid of a political movement because it's not a physical entity?
And that's the problem, dude. Like my buddy Brad said it really, really well the other day. He said some things are problems we can solve, and some things are situations that just have to be managed.
Right.
And I feel like when it
Well,
comes to this issue, it's just again, first off, I'll be very clear with this, and I'll say this now, and I'll say this at the end of the broadcast. In my personal belief of this is that the Israelis are more than capable of handling this issue.
Right.
I mean, they're a nuclear power with a very well trained, well armed military, a
Right.
very strong economy. They can handle this if they need to. They do not need anybody else's help. And I think ideally that this should be an Israeli-Palestinian issue for them to figure out. That's not saying that what Hamas did wasn't horrible. It's horrible. That's just saying that I think that this is like it's like if you and I went to school and every day two kids were fighting each other. Every day they were fighting each other. And we saw them back and forth fighting each other. And maybe one day, one kid, he does something horrible, stabs the other kid in the eye, right?
Yeah.
You'd still know that these two kids are fighting all the time. And you'd be like, and you wouldn't jump into it. You'd say, this is every day they do this. And eventually they're going to figure it out. Hopefully.
That's not funny, but it was one of those, you know, acknowledging that's just the fact of the matter laughs.
I mean, that's the truth. I mean, like that's really the thing, right? Is that you kind of have to acknowledge that. I mean, the thing that, let me, for the people listening at home, you know this, but maybe you don't want to believe it. The world is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. There has been violence with humanity since we started. And probably the very last moments of our existence, there will be somebody stealing someone's shit or beating somebody up or shooting somebody. It'll be 2 seconds before the asteroid hits and somebody's punching somebody else because they called their mama a hoe on Facebook or something. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just the truth. We have that in our nature, whether we like it or not. And especially when you throw God and land and history and you throw all these things into it, man.
but us
I mean,
Americans don't.
like what? Yeah, like what are we
We
gonna
don't
do?
know
Like
anything
what?
about that. You know what I mean? We're. I mean, you know, Marcus's family history, his background's a little bit more
Right?
discombobulated than ours. But I'm just saying, us and Americans were kind of spoiled here. We don't have somebody on our border beating down our door. Like they've been battling at least for 50 years, right? If
Yeah.
not for 2000. And like because of, you know, like I'm a Christian, I'm a believer. I went and I looked up because the Bible does say, you know, like God promised land for the Israelites. And I was looking up the map of like what that looked like in the 12 tribes and all that. You know what I mean? It's not exactly what it is right now, but like they've been battling back and forth for 2,000 years. I know you're saying that's more of the cultural stuff than the political side of it. But like my thing is, it should be as simple as, okay, Hamas attacked Israel. The government has a right to defend their country and their people and seek potential justice for those lives. But that shouldn't come at the cost of innocent lives on the other side of that border.
And that's where we get into the
the
moral
thing.
dilemma. That becomes the moral dilemma because we brought this up earlier before we were talking like pregame about how, okay, for instance, Eric, you live in Florida, Panhandle of Florida, Central Florida. I live in Arkansas.
North Florida. I
live in Arkansas, one of the reddest parts of the country. Okay. We are going to be building a monument to the unborn at our state capitol. That's how pro-life Arkansans are. Okay.
Mhm.
We're so pro-life, abortion's illegal, and we're going to make a statue to let you know that it's illegal. That's how much we are pro-life. Those same people, the past week or past few days, have been calling for the utter glassing of Gaza.
Yeah.
And you say, hey, but what about the kids? And they go, well, screw those kids.
Exactly.
That doesn't seem to me to track. That doesn't seem to me to be something that you can't have those two ideas simultaneously, in my opinion.
Exactly.
And I'm going to ask you guys, why do you think it's like that? Why do you think Americans have taken such a pro-Israeli side?
I mean, I think that honestly, I mean, well, let's just be honest. I mean, I think that we have been allies with Israel since essentially their founding, or what we consider their formal founding, right? And in fact, like Kristallnacht or whatever basically happens because of U.S. backing. I think that that's part of our culture kind of brought into it. Obviously, there's a huge Christian element to it. I mean, if Israel was named any other name, if like the name was,
Not real.
Something else, if it wasn't in the Bible, if it wasn't a biblical name, you would have a lot of people that just wouldn't, I mean, dude, I mean, I grew up in church. I'm telling you, I've heard Israel more times before I was 8 years old, before I even knew it was a country. Like, like, I mean, like, I mean, and so that's really that's a huge part of it. It's the truth. And I think that, I mean, that's why I think that. And I think that people, we identify with the most animalistic natures that we come across. And so we imagine like our children being slaughtered. We imagine our family being slaughtered. We imagine this, and we instantly want to pick some side, quote unquote side. And I think that that's kind of the default, and if you bring up, hey, the reason that Hamas keeps wanting to kill people in Israel is because Israel has done some stuff too to them, then all of a sudden it's like you've made some grave error,
Right.
by just pointing out really objective fact. Like, this isn't calling a side. This is just saying, it's like calling an MMA fight. A hit B, B hit A kicked B put A in a rear naked choke. A got out of it. You just call it back and forth. But if you start saying that about, hey, Israel did some things too during their history that haven't been great, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you got to be canceled. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Right. And I want to interject real quick. I want to thank my parents for imparting the fact upon me that you should always ask why. And that's what I think Americans don't do. They don't ask why this conflict is happening. They just see it as, I think this is painted in the light of 9/11, because I saw comments about that. The Palestinians were cheering 9/11. Why are these people, nobody wakes up hating anybody just because.
That was the Ron Paul thing. I mean, Ron Paul said that many times in the early 2000s. He said that, Americans and foreign policymakers especially would do well to ask, why do these people hate us? We need to return to isolationism. We shouldn't be so involved in the affairs of others. As a nation, we should just want to be left alone. My phone is about to die, but we are with y'all in spirit. Thanks, Common Arms Trade Company. That's one of our sponsors. As a nation, we definitely need to work on ourselves for a while. That's been my whole thing, man. Right. And here's another one. Eric, you know this because I guarantee you've had this happen. And Marcus, you have too. I knew so many anti-war people when we were giving money to Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
Who were America first.
Yeah.
And we got to get America fixed, and we ain't got no business sending our money anywhere in the world. That's what they say. We got no business sending our money anywhere in the world. But apparently what they really meant was we got no business sending our money anywhere in the world except for Israel.
Exactly.
We got no business getting in a war anywhere except for Israel. That's what they meant, Has anyone seen videos of the Christians being accosted for being in Israel? I've known that's happened. I have not seen it,
though. I have seen that.
Literally, last week before this incident even happened, I saw some Orthodox Jews spitting on Christian worshipers that were carrying a cross through the path they said Jesus walked.
Man, I just don't get it, dude. I just don't get it. Like, why we got to fight wars about who's God's most peaceful? Like, I just don't get it.
And if you really found God, it is love. At the end of the day, God is love. He is teaching you to love yourself, love what he has done for you, and love your fellow man, because all the three Abrahamic religions, at the end of the day, the God of however you want to separate them, that God wants you to live your best life. He wants he wants to bestow blessings.
But but here we do have to give, if you want to throw in the God thing, we do have to bring up the fact that, like, when it comes to Islam, there's really essentially two classes of it, just kind of like there's with Christianity or anything, where you have people that kind of take it to an extreme and people that kind of take it maybe with a more, I guess, soft approach. And that concept of, spiritual jihad, that concept, we funded madrasas in the 80s because we thought it was going to be good to make sure that we radicalized Muslims because that was going to help us beat the Soviets.
Right.
And so we funded places that taught kids to blow up other people.
Yeah.
And they would get 72 virgins because that was going to help us beat the Soviets. And now those kids have grown up, if they didn't blow themselves up, and they had children, many of them, who they're teaching the same thing to if they don't blow themselves up. And then we wonder why this is happening. It seems to me that we seem to cause a lot of our own shit.
Always.
Like a lot of it.
Have y'all seen, there was like a small video of someone, it was like a Palestinian sitting in the rubble, and the caption basically said, this guy just lost his whole family. Like a Palestinian sitting in the rubble, a young adult male just lost his whole family from these bombs. And it reminds me, have y'all seen the movie The Kingdom?
Yes.
That explains blowback so well. Like literally, I don't care whose fault it is. If you bomb my house and you kill my family and I survive it, I will probably spend the rest of my life
fighting you down.
I would be on the singular
mission. We're not. Well, we are because we're funding both sides.
And so, so think about like if you're an Israeli from this weekend and like you're one of those unfortunate souls where these assholes kick your door in, they killed your wife, maybe raped her first, whatever.
Exactly.
You're the rest of your life, you're going to be like, fuck those people in Gaza. I don't care.
Yeah.
And so it's just hate over hate over hate over hate.
There's no winner.
And honestly, it's kind of justified on both sides. And so,
as much as we hate it, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want people to think we are saying what Hamas did is justified.
No, fuck no.
But the retaliation to carpet bomb an entire village with innocent bystanders, that's also not the right response either. You know what I mean?
Well, and if you took some of these photographs, and someone that I really respect, kind of religious in a religious world in a spiritual sense, said something to me a couple of days ago because I was kind of going off on sort of the glass Gaza thing. I had gotten in that kind of mindset where we were talking about how do you handle this, and I had kind of walked over to this very dark side of the conversation, which is, well, maybe the only way to ever handle it is you just get rid of everybody. And I was kind of in that talking point. And he said, Michael, if I took some of these photographs and I didn't include a caption, and I didn't tell you who they were, and I just showed you the photo, every single one of them, you'd feel sad.
Yes.
Yeah.
He said, every single one, you would feel sad. He's like, but as soon as we throw a name on it, then all of a sudden you're feeling differently. He's like, and why is that? And he's like, and he said, and the challenge for us humans is to figure that out. And that stuck with me ever since that moment. It's like, that's true, man. That's really, really true.
And I think one of our greater voices in the libertarian movement summed up this conflict very well this past weekend. He's been called anti-Semitic, and I found it ironic that a man named Spike Cohen,
could be literally possesses the Jewish space laser. He owns the Jewish space laser. Yeah.
I was like, and there's a lot of left-wing Jews that right-wing Jews hate because they look at this from more of a humanitarian perspective than a religious Zionist perspective. And people calling Spike Cohen anti-Semitic, I just found it ironic and just disturbing that we can't have an actual conversation about this matter without everybody just delving into their little bunker and saying, no, if you're not supporting Israel, then you're anti-American, because Nikki Haley and a few other Republican candidates said the attack on Israel was an attack on America. And I was like, hey, hold up. If you know the history of Hamas, technically this is the first time they've interacted with Americans. Up until this point, Hamas was formed in the 90s or something around that. They had never attacked America or Americans. Now, that whole attacking American things is a gray area as well, because a lot of these people that were surround that open air prison of Gaza and those kibbutzes are dual citizens.
Right.
And I wouldn't necessarily say their loyalty is to America, because, being an American citizen has its inherent advantages. But if you're living in a foreign country full time, how do you consider those people truly American when they're just using that American citizenry for the benefits that they could possibly get, whether it be an entitlement or otherwise?
So let's take a step back and say and do this kind of thought process. What should be, if anything, America's role moving forward? Because and let's kind of play both sides of the argument here. I'll take the argument that the sort of neocon argument. The neocon argument is that the Middle East is a very unstable place with people who hate us and want to kill us, and that Israel is a key strategic ally there, and having them supported keeps us safe here. That's the neocon argument. I think it's a pretty easy argument to poke holes in. And that's why I've taken that side and said, hey, that's their argument. I'll let you guys poke the holes in it, but I already know what they are. But that's what they say, is that, the unequivocal support of them, even the fact that we're $33 trillion in debt, again, most of that being run up because we've tried to be the world's police for 23 years. Even though the fact that we're this close to a currency crisis in this country, even though the fact that Eric, Marcus, your children, grandchildren, my children, grandchildren, very likely have no economic prospects if we continue on the path we're on, where they have the future of a very, very poor standard of living, where, even though all that's going on, that's what the neocon argument is.
Eric, you want to go first? Yeah.
Well, and we can get into Kenneth's comment there. He pretty much nailed it. But I would say that if it is destabilized, it's because of the American presence there. Have you ever seen the pictures of Iran before we installed the Ayatollah? I believe.
Oh, dude, it's crazy.
Disco paradise.
Dude, it's crazy. I saw the first time I saw that, I was like 17 years old. And someone showed me it was like a Time magazine of Iran. It was like from the 60s, and it said visit Iran or something. And it was like a trip there. And I was like, these people look like they're just American. This is America.
Yeah, they look like really tan Americans.
Yeah, and like there's women in like pencil skirts, and they're
that could have been Miami.
Yeah, I mean, dude, exactly. And then American intervention did what?
Exactly, it destabilized it. But I've had this thought in a comment, and one reason why. So if I was the prime minister of Israel, if I was to go into Palestine or Gaza Strip, I would do it with special forces, and I would do it with strategic strikes, not carpet bombing. And I would find the targets and eliminate them without any, innocent bystanders being hurt. That doesn't make a lot of money for the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? 5.56 rounds don't cost as much as a Tomahawk missile does, or whatever we've sold to Israel and the rest of our allies in the Middle East. Egypt and Jordan, we've sold arms to them too. And those countries seem to be doing fine, okay, in the Middle East, because they're our allies and they purchase our military-industrial complex.
Well, we sell to both sides. We've been doing that pretty much of all of history. We talked about it many times in this broadcast. The central banking class, essentially since the Napoleonic Wars, makes money by financing both sides of every conflict that's ever been in the history since then. And even kind of the Medici family. I mean, so Marcus, what does a President Marcus of America do in this situation, and what would a Prime Minister of Marcus do if they were in Israel?
Mr. Speaker, before we get into that, I want to have my guy Kenneth Blevins interject real quick, and if you could read that for me.
Sure. Kenneth Blevins says, stop spending taxpayer money to fund foreign engagements. If you want to set up a donations for foreign affairs, have a list where you can pick where your money goes, a place to put the amount and payment information. I love that idea. In fact, I tweeted something very similar. Then if you trust the government to do what you think it should do with your money, that's on you. The U.S. government shouldn't take money to give to someone else by force. That's exactly what I said the first afternoon. I tweeted out, I said, you have every right to voluntarily support another military so long as they aren't, against us. And you have every right to go fight there, but you don't have the right to force someone else to do it. There it is, the military-industrial complex. Anyone else notice that defense contractors, suppliers, stock? Well, of course they went up. Of course stocks, yeah, exactly.
Okay. So with me, I want to point out two things, because everybody likes to say Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. First of all, I think that's false, because Israel has stated over and over and over that they are a Jewish state, and any integration of Palestinians or Arabs would degrade that fact. You cannot have a democracy in the sense of the term where everybody doesn't have a voice in the process. And I don't believe in democracy. I think democracy is mob rule, and
It
it's
is.
bullshit.
Democracy is horrible. Yeah.
But you can't call Israel the only democracy in the Middle East when the United States spent what, $5 to $7 trillion in Iraq alone to make them a democracy.
Look how
And
that turned out.
what the fuck did we get out of that? Iraqi freedom shit. If they're not a democracy, if they're not the second democracy in the Middle East, then we need to hold all the people that sold the Iraq war. Well, Colin Powell's gone. George Bush is still here. Rumsfeld's gone. Dick Cheney's still here. We need to hold all of those people accountable for war crimes if Iraq is not a democracy in the Middle East. And all the Americans that died and were wounded. And one thing I will say about conflict, my guy Eric can speak to this as a veteran, but nobody goes to war and doesn't get wounded.
That's
Seeing
right. Yeah.
humans getting killed and killing other humans is not a natural act. It is an act of barbarianism that is a wound. It's a mental wound. You see people get blown apart. My best friend, he's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Marines. He said the most disturbing thing he saw in Iraq was wild dogs eating a human carcass.
I've heard similar.
And if that's not a Purple Heart injury, I don't know what is, because that has to be one of the most disturbing things you could ever imagine seeing in your entire life.
I've lost more friends that I've served with to suicide than I did in combat. You know what I mean? And I think the number is something like 1 in 4 or 4 times more, or something like that, suicides of people that served in Iraq and Afghanistan than died in combat. Some crazy statistic. And it's way up there. Everybody knows the 22 a day. You know what I mean? I've wrote marks for stop soldier suicide. So it is, they're invisible wounds, you know what I mean? And I've lost people that served in my company too. Guys that you thought were invincible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Captain Americas of our company came home years later, married, several kids, ended up taking their own life. So
I read a story. This is probably about 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago. A returning veteran from Afghanistan, but done like 2 or 3 conflicts. One of those kind of Captain America guys, like, he's Billy Bat. Like he could fuck all 3 of us up with, with his head in a paper bag and one hand behind his back. He comes home and, he's obviously has a lot of issues, and he's going back and forth to the VA, getting all this stuff done. And what put him over the edge, apparently, according to his wife, is a possum had died under the porch, and it smelled like death.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that smell apparently drove him to suicide. That's because crazy. he couldn't, it was like this one thing he couldn't control, he couldn't get rid of. And you think about that and you go, man, the cost of war is really high.
Yeah.
For the people that have to fight it. And that's the part that makes me so angry is the people in DC, the Nikki Haley's and the Rumsfelds and everybody else. They're going to sit in an air-conditioned office. They're going to, with the stroke of a pen, send somebody's kid to go die or come back, whatever. That kid's going to come back to a fucked up economy, a system that doesn't take care of them, and they're going to pass him on the side of the road on their way to their multi-million-dollar house where he's asking for $1 and not give him anything.
And that's what pisses me off about neocons like Dan Crenshaw or whatever his name is. Like, dude served, lost his eye, and he came back and he's one of the worst war hawks that there is. You would think that he had seen enough that he would know this is not the way we need to move forward.
And,
I mean, it's horrible. Yeah.
And from the financial aspect of all of this that's going on, everybody talks about, Ukraine got this many billions and that many billions. Every year we send $4.5 billion to Israel. Israel is a first world country that exports arms and has a military industrial complex that is burgeoning. It's a small entity, but it's sending weapons all over the world. And one thing they won't do is send weapons to Ukraine because they don't want to piss off the Russians. They're trying to.
So listen to this, Marcus. Hold on, I just had to pull a fact here. An economist ranks Israel as the 4th most successful economy among developed countries in 2022.
That's crazy.
So they don't need
Why
our
do
4.5 billion. They really don't need it.
They're doing better than us.
I mean, they're right there with us, and they got this much. I mean, they're doing pretty good economically speaking. Yes,
and that's been going on.
What's their national debt? Let me look down.
Yeah, look up, find out what their national debt
is.
We've
been sending roughly that much money to the state of Israel, a first world country. And I'm not saying, I could say this. Hold on. I have Jewish friends.
I'm listening. Go ahead.
So with that being said, I can't be anti-Semitic because I have Jewish friends. But why would the United States feel obligated to send a first world country that is doing perfectly fine economically for 50 plus years, $4.5 billion a year? And nobody has said shit about that. If you do say, because there were some people in Congress that said we should not be funding this country, and they got marked as anti-Semitic.
Right.
Why?
I mean, so
that makes no sense to me.
So let's take a little turn here and jump into a little bit of a conspiracy realm.
Hell yeah.
So the whole Epstein situation, right, has been rumored that he is a Mossad agent that was used for sexual blackmail in support of the Israeli government, essentially.
Whoa.
And so that's where that story comes, and that's where it starts, and that's kind of where it develops from, right? And so you wonder, was that kind of part of the thing? Is like, hey, we have to make sure this kind of keeps going, and part of that is we have to make sure people in influence, we have something against them, whether they're tech leaders, whether they're magnates of business, whether they're politicians. Because again, like it, love it, hate it, whatever, think we're crazy. Ghislaine Maxwell was the only person ever convicted of sex trafficking people to no one.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. To no one.
Release the client list.
Right. To no one. And so you kind of have that kind of there. And here's where this is where I really get into something in my head. Man, the Mossad and the Israeli intelligence operation is, objectively speaking, one of the most developed, capable, and articulate in the entire world. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
In the entire world. So much so that, I mean, they really actually do prevent terror attacks. They don't do like the FBI does and set up some autistic kid to do it, right? So when it comes to this issue, when it comes to the attack on this scale with this many people involved, that it was this coordinated, because this wasn't like one lone guy who could have went under the radar. This is a seriously coordinated issue. You only have one of two things that could have happened here. Either you had incompetence rising to the level of gross negligence, essentially, on the Israeli intelligence community, or somebody knew about it and let it happen anyway. And this is where I get, and I said this the other day to somebody, I don't trust governments anymore. Right. I don't trust them anymore. And this is not without historical precedent. Governments many, many times have allowed things to happen bad to their citizens to coax an enemy out of whatever so they could do something.
To Michael's point, 9/11, there was more than enough data that knew that the people that were going to perpetrate it were here in America, and they were going to do what they did.
Well, those famous memos that came across, it said there are pilots from some Saudi Arabia that are training to fly planes and not learn how to land them. I mean, like, there you go. Yeah.
And Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a provocation that the United States did to draw the North Vietnamese into conflict, and that was a known issue.
What about, Bay of Pigs, you know what I mean? And
Bay of Pigs was another American operation. And one of the kickers was Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, the United States knew the Japanese Navy went dark. That means they weren't communicating. That's one of the first indications of attack in that particular time frame of not even U.S. world history.
Yeah.
They stopped communicating. You know something's about to happen. And the
Yeah,
United States knew the Japanese Navy had left its ports and was in an unknown location. So all of these things, everybody, there's no way on God's green earth, Mossad, which is probably the best intelligence agency in the world.
So
Those guys have
Marcus, to interject, they're
everywhere.
so good. They're so good at
Yes.
what they do that when like it came to cracking iPhone encryption and nobody could do it, that's who got it farmed out.
That
right?
shit was done.
They're the go-to person in the world for like a number of technological attacks that nobody else can do, which is probably another reason why we have them as an ally, right? I mean, so yeah,
they're really smart.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't make. I mean, we're not talking about one single person. I mean, you got people flying paragliders, over walls. You got people taking excavator equipment, death squads going to multiple cities simultaneously. Like this had to be coordinated in a very, very large scale. And you're telling me that in all of that coordination, not one person turned and not one person intercepted something? Like that just doesn't hold water to me, man. It just doesn't.
So the thing about Gaza, it is a very small area. It's probably the most densely packed area in the entire world. Over 2 million people in this open air prison. How did they practice paragliding?
I guess on the beach. I don't know.
Yeah. No, we're doing some recreational activity where I'm paragliding with the AK-47 and about to land at a music festival. There is no way this shit. This is not conspiratorial. By
that's what I. That's kind of.
They appeared to be highly trained. Is that what you're alluding to?
They appear to be highly trained, and again, it's so over the top that if you just step back and you take the emotion out of it and you look at it just objectively speaking, you go, "There's just no way that somebody didn't know about this."
Yeah,
there's just not a way. I mean, you're telling me that in all those thousands of people, hundreds of people that carried this attack out, not one of them wanted to turn state's evidence? Not one of them went to the reward program with the Mossad and said, "Hey, set my family up for life. Let me tell you what's about to happen." Because that's what they do.
Mossad is deeply entrenched because they have in the Gaza Strip, they have them just packed in and they're surrounded by checkpoints, minefields, electric fences, walls. Those people are just subjected to some of the most inhumane treatment you could ever imagine on earth. And again, by no means are we endorsing Hamas, but I would say you could tell the barbarity of this situation by the simple fact of what the Israeli defense minister had recently said. He said, we're going to cut off all the fuel. We're going to cut off the electricity. We're going to cut off the food shipments. We're going to cut off the water. That's not a military operation. That's a siege where you're asking, well, you're not asking, you're telling somebody.
And it makes you wonder. We were talking about democracy, before earlier. We were talking about this before we went on the air. Eric, you brought up a good point about democracy and the Palestinians. Kind of make that point again that you had talked about before we went live.
So I guess in 2006 was the last election, and 60% of people voted in favor of Hamas running, I guess, Palestine, the government entity of Palestine. So that means 40% of the people that voted in that election voted against that. And they're still, I'm assuming, the ones that can't get out because, Egypt won't let them in. They don't have anywhere. Israel won't let them in. They don't have anywhere else to go. They're essentially, I don't think Israel will let them establish a port. You know what I mean? So
they can't.
So they're like basically landlocked. They're stuck there. So imagine that number of people that were against Hamas, 40%, since then has, according to a recent poll, grown to 52%. So you have to think, like, they voted against it. They were forced to live with it for over, I don't know, is that 15 years? I'm terrible at math.
Yeah, about 15, 16 years, yeah.
And now even a simple majority, 52, is still against it. But they voted for it. Now they have to suffer. And innocent people that aren't standing along
that didn't support it, didn't vote for it. And like you said, they really don't have a way to go anywhere or a place to go.
They can't be refugees. No other countries in the Middle East will take them.
It's just it's like you start, like I said, you start really, if you take the emotion out of it and you start dissecting the situation, just logistically speaking, economically speaking, politically speaking, you get to a place where you're like, wow, this is a clusterfuck. Like, and that's really the only word that I can come with it. Pardon my French. You know, I am a real human who, I'm not like one of these stuffy politicians who doesn't cuss. I'm a real person who's lived a real life. And yes, it's a clusterfuck. I mean, that's what it is.
Did y'all see Justin Amacha's post, like ironically from 2 days ago, about like his dad, because he was past his dad, Palestinian Christian, that was kicked out of their house by the Israeli government and came to America as a refugee because of the Palestinian-Israeli war.
Right.
Literally, he was posting pictures of his like host family, the first time hosting his whole family there 2 days ago. Like that was the anniversary. I was like, what's the terrible timing of that magnificent occasion for his family and his lineage to be coinciding with these atrocities happening over there at the same time. Don't know if y'all seen that post.
So again, post. Like, you know, that's and I know we always bring up Ron Paul a lot here, but that's kind of the Ron Paul era discussion. Is he kind of in so many words essentially warned against these binary narratives when it comes to the Middle East and it comes to American involvement. You know, that this is there's I know that people want everything to be like a Star Wars episode, you know, where here's the bad guys and here's the good guys. And what you get to, it's much more gray. There's just a lot, there's things everywhere. And it's just like, again, that's why I keep going back to, this is not a thing for America to solve. The Israelis are completely capable of doing this. And they don't need our help. They can use our prayers if you want to voluntarily send them money. But yeah, I mean, I just don't want to see any U.S. troops on the ground, and I don't want to see any U.S. taxpayer money sent.
Well, there's a couple things on that. I don't think the United States is willing to go into Gaza itself. I think the United States military presence there is to discourage any other actors in the region from going in and, you know, like it wasn't the 7-Day War or whatever, Transjordan and Syria and Lebanon attacked Israel. I don't think that's the case there. But I do want to say this, because like I said previously, my parents taught me to ask why. And the state of Israel was actually founded upon a few terrorist acts that got the British mandate out of what was known as Palestine. And I want to encourage Americans to read about the King David Hotel terrorist attack. Did I say that right? A terrorist attack. And
yeah, what's kind of the summary of that? Because, you know, honestly, I had never heard of it, and I probably should have.
Well, basically, there were some Zionists. The Zionist movement started in the 1920s, and there was you know, I talked about this in the pregame. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in Europe for thousands of years. There's always been anti-Semitism.
Obviously, there was a significant amount in Germany. You know,
And so directly after World War II, nobody wanted the Jewish people, the Ashkenazi Jews, in their country, in just about every country in Europe. The Soviet Union, Stalin was kind of Jewish lineage, and he didn't like Jews, even though Karl Marx was Jewish, which I found ironic. Hitler,
so like I said, get to the point. So they wanted to establish a country, and what happens at the King David Hotel?
So they didn't want Jews in Europe. So after World War II, a lot of Jewish people migrated to what it was known as Palestine at the time under the British rule. Because the British took over after World War I, they overtook Palestine from the Ottoman Empire.
That's right. Yes.
So they had control over that region they called Palestine. And then after World War II, they didn't want the Jewish people in Europe because of the anti-Semitism. So most of the Ashkenazi Jews, which are Jews of Eastern and whatever Middle Europe is, but Eastern and Middle Europe descent, went to Palestine, and they committed terrorist attacks upon the British protectorate of Palestine in order to tried to found the state of Israel, and it took them a few years, but they achieved that in 1948. And in 1948, the lines that were drawn for the state of Israel were separate from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, where the Palestinians lived. The Jews got their state, the Palestinians didn't. And that was a bitter turning point for this whole conflict from 1948 forward. And, you know, immediately when the Jewish state was declared, they got attacked by Arab nations.
Right.
United States and British intervened and armed them, and they were able to defeat that. But from 1967 and the Six-Day War, when Israel actually captured the West Bank and took over Palestine and the Golan Heights, it ensured that Palestinians would never have their own separate country. And that's where a lot of this conflict comes from, because every people has the right to self-determination. The Palestinians have been denied that.
Well, hold on. I want to pause here too about this King David Hotel thing, because it's even that is kind of multi-layered, right? So, like the Jewish National Council denounced the bombing.
Right.
The Jerusalem Post basically published a hit piece saying it was horrible that it happened.
Right.
And there's a number of prominent Jews in the area that were like, this is not the way to do it, right? So we kind of get to the same Palestine argument here, okay? Where you have a group of people, quote unquote, doing this thing over here, and there's other people that don't agree with it, even though they might all kind of be on this umbrella, right? And so what's interesting is then, like at the very end of this article, it says that Richard Crossman, who was a British Labour Party member of Parliament, he says, when the King David Hotel bombing was mentioned, Wiseman started crying heavily. He said, I can't help but feel proud of our boys. If it had only been a German headquarters, they would have gotten the Victoria Cross.
Precisely.
That's a very poignant thing there, right? It's more where it's directed than what the actual act is, right? Like nobody, if tomorrow they had done like if the Nazis were still around, and you know, people had, you know, zoomed in with paragliders and done this, people are like, okay, great, right? And so that's a very poignant point about how complicated this is. So even like that situation is very complicated. You have, again, about 60, 70, 80% of Jews in the area that hated that this even happened, right? I mean, so it's just very unique. I mean, not unique, but it's very interesting that every single one of these things is there. Again, there's no black or white. It's all gray. As a German, I'm going to go ahead and shut the fuck up about it. The scientific libertarian.
Wise. Very wise.
I had no idea he was German.
I guess he is. You know, I don't.
Yeah.
I guess he is.
The stance I take as a white guy when it comes to talking about slavery.
Yeah, right. Now, interestingly speaking, though, we talk about the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was still dealing in white slaves, Marcus. At the turn of the the 20th century. So
slavery is not a racial thing, and I don't think racism or prejudice is a racial thing. It, to me, more now it's about money and societal standing than anything else. But we need to understand that we all have a common humanity.
Right.
And the fact that we don't acknowledge that common humanity is why we're in the positions that we are right now. That's why Israel is in the position it is right now, because they don't want to see the humanity of Palestinians, because you can't see that if you subjugate people. Like I said, with the Israeli defense minister, you're cutting off food and water. That's everybody. That's not your military target. And then the bombing targets that they have engaged have been the media and residential buildings for the most part. And the fact that you're destroying the media is you're trying to eliminate information from being disseminated. And, you know, that is a legitimate military target in any conflict. You can
I think that, but, you know, again, I'm going to kind of defend Israel a little bit here. I think that they're just fucking tired, you know? Like, I think, like, let's say that my conspiracy mindset is wrong and they just didn't know and nobody knew and nobody allowed it. I mean, I think they're just fucking tired, Marcus. I mean, like, you know, at some point in time, like, doesn't everybody though have a breaking point? Like everybody. And that's really the crux, the fulcrum of this entire lever is the Palestinians probably have a breaking point, and so do the Israelis, right?
Israel has two choices. they can either parcel out a independent and continuous Palestinian state, or they can integrate the West Bank and Gaza Strip into Israel. Those are their only two options that they can do to solve this issue. And I don't think they will ever do the latter because they call themselves a Jewish state, and integration of the Palestinians would dilute that.
If so, this is a compromise I just thought of. Because I had to look at the map and see who's around them. I would, if I was Israel, try to negotiate with Lebanon. Is it Jordan and Egypt? Right? Is that the ones that surround them? I think
You have to include Syria too, because the Golan Heights are
Syria. So Israel negotiate with those 4 countries to accept Palestinian refugees if they want to leave, or like we're gonna essentially, if Palestinians are okay with it, and they won't be, but we're gonna sell the Palestinian land to those countries. Israel, like, I don't want a part of your land. I just want you to have a place to stay. Or you can be an Israeli citizen. Now that's you got to live under Israeli laws, this, that, and the other. I think that could be a compromise. I don't know that that's the right answer. I just randomly thought about that. Looking at the map, like, why won't these countries just let Palestinians in? And you would have, now, I don't know that that's kind of fallen into that territory of Ukraine giving up land to Russia. Like that, I don't think that's the right answer, but it might stop the killing. I don't know. That's not a good answer. I take that back.
I mean, the idea is like, how do you make everyone whole, right?
Sorry.
Like, yeah.
So
how do you make everyone whole? That's the issue.
That's the thing.
The West Bank was part of what was called Transjordan at the time, and the Israelis won that in the conflict. I think it was the 6-Day War, as well as the Gaza Strip. Now, the Gaza Strip borders Egypt. The Egyptians don't have a peace pact with Israel. They don't want to. Egypt used to be the prime source of Arab nationalism back in the day. They have fallen far from that more recently.
The Arab Spring.
Yeah. And so they don't want the Gazans coming into Egypt, because I guarantee you at least 1 million people leave Gaza Strip immediately if they said. And then on the West Bank, the Jordanians have what they call refugee camps to this day of Palestinians that were either removed or voluntarily left the West Bank. Yeah, and that's why that's not going to happen.
So, Eric, this is what I think the solution is the solution that I always think things are. Prosperity brings peace.
Right.
Okay. So, like, for instance, let's compare Gaza to Dubai. Okay. Dubai doesn't have radical Islam going on, right? They are a economic hub, and essentially, pun intended or unintended, a mecca in as far as economic development, prosperity in the Middle East. And so you think about like Dubai and the way that Dubai came to be what it is, and then imagine the other places in the Middle East where the United States has essentially used the boot on people, right? Like Libya is not a better place than it used to be, though it's in Africa. Iraq is not a better place than it used to be. Iran is not a better place than it used to be. In each one of these places, we did what, Eric? We came there to bring them democracy. We're going to bring you some fucking democracy at the end of a Tomahawk missile, and we're going to blow everything to shit, and then we're going to leave. And then, that was the other thing that, that kind of got me frustrated is people talking about, well, Iraq's just a puppet government for Iran. And I'm like, well, who fucking caused that?
Yeah. Everybody accepted Saddam Hussein because he was a buffer to Iran and a buffer, whether neocons like it or not, Saudi Arabia is not our friend, and neither are the overwhelming majority of the Gulf states. They are not our friend.
Iraq was about making money, and you can't tell me any different. Yeah.
One of those that like, hey, look, they're flourishing, but we probably, you know what I mean? Are they one of those like?
No, every country in the Middle East that has an American base is a direct response to Iran. That's just the bottom line. They They only want
I'm just
America.
telling you guys, you throw
know,
some, you throw out some McDonald's and some broadband and some PlayStation 4, and you know, you start you let it to where they can walk down the store and get, you know, get a Snickers and a Mountain Dew. Like things start getting a lot more peaceful when you do those kind of things.
Yeah.
And because prosperity brings peace. It just does. It's the reason why, like, I often rail against the 1980s argument against China. China doesn't want America to disappear. We're their biggest customer. Yeah.
No, there's no way in hell that
they might want to control us economically, but they're not going to like blow us up. Like that's just not going to happen.
There will never be a military conflict within the next 200 years between China and the United States, because you can't send cargo ships one way and cruise missiles the other way. That's
exactly right. Yeah. And again, that's why libertarians have a principle of free trade and free association, because it tends to, like I said earlier, make society better. When people get prosperity, they tend not to want to kill other people. Like when you have stuff to lose, you don't want to go blow shit up.
That would be my only pushback to when Common Arms, I know it's one of your sponsors, said use the term isolationism. No, it's non-interventionism, because we don't want to isolate ourselves from economic, you know, trade. You know what I mean? And free trade between everyone, really. You know what I mean? As long as they're a peaceful
I'm telling you, man, you put some Costco's in Gaza. You put a couple Costco's, man. You put like a few go-kart tracks. Maybe like, you know, have NASCAR show up there once a year. I'm telling you, things could probably get a lot more peaceful. And I kind of mean that jokingly, but I also mean that seriously.
Oh, that's real shit.
No, seriously.
I really do. I mean that seriously, because again, people don't want to blow things up when they have things to lose.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know.
So in closing, as we wrap this thing up, I want to say that we did solve the Middle East issue between the Israelis and Palestinians.
We did. We just solved it. Yep.
We brought forth a lot of ideas and historical facts that will lead to the resolution of this conflict. And if you don't believe that, fuck you and your mom.
Marcus, he can get away with it. That's what we're ending this whole broadcast on?
Yeah.
That's what I think it's still live. I'm seeing a live.
Hey, I did want to touch on this, and we got like maybe 3 minutes we can squeeze it in here. So this is a 2A podcast. We're hosted on the Firearms Radio Network. We talk about 2A issues a lot, and then we typically talk about libertarian politics in regards to 2A. So when I saw the footage from Israel, the first thing I thought was, that would never happen in America. And the reason it would never happen in America is because we have guns here, right? And so then somebody said, well, Michael, they have guns in Israel. And I said, well, so I started looking up Israeli gun laws. And there's no guaranteed right to firearm ownership. You can apply for a permit, but 40% of them are denied annually for no reason at all. And they recently went from 50 rounds you're allowed to keep in your house to now 100. If you were one of the people lucky enough to have one granted to you. So I hope to God that this whole entire situation, if anything good comes out of it, is the next time a progressive or a Marxist or some other dumbass talks about banning assault weapons or why do you need 30 rounds, just show them the footage. That's my rant on that one.
Had anyone at that rave been concealed or open carrying, which in the state of Florida is still illegal, Ron DeSantis. Anyways, had anyone there been open carrying or concealed carrying, they could have popped them dudes out of the sky. You know what I mean?
They were floating. They would have been like skeet shooting.
Like after the first one lands and they realize what's going on.
Dude, I was thinking about that too, because they got these little gas tanks on the back of them, right? You know, and they got a big fan blowing around. Exactly. You know, 100 rounds will get your dick half hard. I'm of the belief that any urban combat, you at least need 13 fully loaded magazines. That's kind of my number, because that's my number is 13. You know. You don't want to run out of, you know, you're getting shot at. You don't want to run out of bullets. But yeah, think about that, man. Like if that would have happened if you're telling me like in Eastern Arkansas during duck season, if that shit was going on, dude, every one of those fucking paragliders would have been blown the fuck up before. I mean, like it'd have been over. Like, I mean, it had never happened.
If we'll be selling paraglider tags in Arkansas.
They would, man, and we'd limit out the day one, like about before dawn. Everybody would have hit limit. It'd have been over, you know. It'd have been
Imagine
game,
happened on
set, match.
December 1st anywhere in America during dove season. It would have been like, oh my goodness,
Dude, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm telling you, I got some redneck friends who would just, man, they would have eaten that up, dude. They'd be like, man, I tell you what, man, I saw that motherfucker coming in. I led him a little bit and I just watched him drop out the sky, Marcus. I just watched him drop.
Some just came across my angle. I let him have it.
I mean, all you gotta do is start popping some holes in that parachute, that wing above there, you know. I mean,
3 rounds of 6 shot through that parachute. He'd have plummeted and broke his spine on the way down.
Yeah, dude.
That's
I mean,
why Mossad fucked up. Mossad, y'all did that shit. I mean,
so again, that's where I want to at least maybe end this on is that if anything, it should edify the reason why the 2A is so important, that government does not infringe on your natural God-given right to self-defense and firearm ownership. It's not a right bestowed to you by government. It's supposed to be one they can't fuck with. That's what it's all about. So, yep, we're there, man. That's
that
mine.
rant sponsored by
Common Arms Trade Company.
Appreciate y'all down in Florida.
That's right.
Florida.
That's right. Marcus, you want to take us off air, brother?
I want to thank everybody for listening and watching the Black Powder Podcast here on the Firearms Radio Network. We want to thank you one and all. And please don't cancel us for any opinions expressed during this podcast.
They were
With
all
that
Marcus.
being said, I ask you all, live free
or die. There we go.
God bless you.
God bless you all. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to the Firearms Radio Network, the Black Powder Podcast.